To this day, Twilight remains a controversial property, not only for its, various controversies, but for the fact that, despite a reputation for being poorly written, it excelled. Being promoted alongside the likes of Harry Potter and The Hunger Games, many, when approaching the series with such high expectations, were left wanting more. Of course, if I'm being honest, Twilight isn't a perfect series. Its prose could have been cleaned, Bella's character could have been developed, and the relationship Bella had with Jacob always felt more natural to me than the one she shared with Edward. But that's not the purpose of this essay. I'm not even here to talk about Twilight's many controversies, from suggestions that Meyer appropriated indigenous culture to the arguments that Edward was abusive while Jacob became a child groomer. It's a loaded discussion, and again, as with my critique of the writing itself, best left to other videos. Instead, this video aims to showcase why Twilight was a good thing. Not a good book, or a beautifully written masterpiece, but just good for our society in general. This isn't to say you have to like the series, though I'll always have a nostalgia bias for Meyer's world. But whatever your opinion of the story, you can't deny some of the positive effects the saga has had. Interestingly, some of Twilight's greatest critics are women, with many accusing the story of being everything from anti-feminist to anti-abortion. But this is ironic, at least to me, simply because of the people who created and championed the series in the first place. Love it or hate it, there are at least 3 positive effects Twilight had. On young people, on culture, and the industries of film and publishing. Even if you couldn't get into the story, it's hard not to be thankful for the good the saga did do. Before we continue, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I rant about fantasy books, discuss characters and lore, share my bookish opinion, and offer the occasional writing advice. If any of that sounds like your cup of blood, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. Twilight will always be controversial, whether for its content or storytelling, but it had a largely positive impact, not only on books, but on the people who read the series, and here's why. Reason number 1, it encouraged teens to read. Encouraging people, especially children, to pick up a book is becoming increasingly difficult, especially with the plethora of distractions. Be it social media, streaming, or video games, many teens view reading as a waste of time. Or if they do value it, they feel they lack the time, because it cuts into their other hobbies. Reading, of course, is great for you. Studies have already proven that reading helps your memory, teaches you empathy, and makes you a smarter person overall. Even those who read fiction can learn plenty by proxy, whether that be an actual fact or a new way of thinking. However, many people still struggle to read. Finishing one book in a year has become an impossibility for many, and plenty of teens find it difficult to focus on or stay engaged with a book. This is where Twilight comes in. In fairness, Twilight wasn't the only book to push kids into reading. Harry Potter and The Hunger Games can also be thanked for drawing young people into written worlds. But Twilight was one of the major contenders in my time, irrespective of its quality. Many people who never read, period, devoured the Twilight books, and even my English teacher made it clear that reading of any subject matter is good for you, encouraging us to read for at least 15 minutes a day, even if we were just reading a magazine. His championing of reading has stuck with me. Too many people will offer their opinions on the right books to read, inadvertently dissuading people from reading altogether. But the fact is, you shouldn't read what you think is good for you. You should read what interests you. And for many people, that was Twilight. Now, Twilight isn't as well written as Harry Potter or The Hunger Games. Despite this, Twilight, for whatever reason, had an addicting quality. And in previous videos, I have analyzed why, pointing to everything from its use of popular tropes to some of the original ideas Meyer had. But I digress. Twilight made children and teenagers read. Even better, more of those kids, because of how much they loved Twilight, felt compelled to pick up other books. Even if some just stuck to Twilight, that was still 4 books they wouldn't have otherwise read. But others became hooked on the genre as a whole, going on to read YA writers like John Green, Suzanne Collins, Veronica Roth, and so on. TikTok, and therefore BookTok, wasn't yet a player in the industry. But Twilight, through its popularity, got people interested in reading books and discussing them. Generating a rapid fandom, Twilight created a phenomenon before TikTok made them common, and one which gave girls a space to share their passion, which brings me to my next point. Reason number 2. It normalized female stories. When I use the term female story, I refer to several things. First, there's the obvious, like the author of the story. Twilight can't be given as much credit here, because female writers of influence were already becoming more acceptable, with everyone from L.M. Montgomery to Margaret Atwood paving the way. But there are other aspects that make a story woman-centric, a big one being the protagonist. Again, we'd had female heroes before, but with the exception of Anne of Green Gables, their stories were seldom given mainstream attention. Anne of Green Gables was never going to be a box office hit in the same way Star Wars was, for example. Though I can't discredit the work done by Buffy, the Alien series, or Kill Bill in normalizing a female lead. Twilight was by no means the pioneer of making a female hero acceptable, but what it did was push the progress we were making further, offering a story that was less action-oriented and more in line with what women find important. The series I listed were still action-first, though Buffy was quite character-oriented too. Twilight does have action, but it takes a back seat to the drama and romance elements. Before Twilight, romance films were viewed as secondary to explosion-packed spectacles with guns and death. But Twilight changed that, showing that a quote-unquote girly film could blow up box office numbers as well as any movie, and therefore had a place. Despite not being an action-adventure story, Twilight, whether as a book or a film, could compete with Star Wars, at least in terms of numbers. Books and films served to a female audience were no longer seen as niche, but were instead given equal consideration to more masculine-minded projects. With Twilight, Meyer proved that a story could be popular without a burly male lead and a car chase, though a burly male love interest might be needed instead. The fact was, women just felt seen. Our interests were no longer a niche, but of equal value to those men had. And the publishing industry has become increasingly diverse ever since. In fact, you could argue that women even dominate the space, at least on BookTok, where the majority of creators and the books they discuss are women-led, with female leads, an exploration of women's issues, even in more action-packed settings, and books written by female authors. You might feel that at its core, Twilight is anti-feminist, but it was also one of the first franchises to have a female writer, a female protagonist, and a female director at its core. Offering exposure to Kristen Stewart and Catherine Hardwicke, as well as revealing an interest in female-led stories, Twilight was a win for women. It didn't start the process, given the existence of Charlene Harris's True Blood franchise or Buffy, but it has to be given credit for pushing it ahead. As a quick aside, be sure to like this video if you're enjoying it so far. Number 3. It legitimized the YA genre. If there's one group that felt more unseen than women, it was teenagers. And if you were a teen girl, it was a double whammy. At one point, YA didn't exist as a genre. Instead, children were expected to jump immediately from Narnia to Stephen King, which must have been a shock to say the least. Now, it's not like teens couldn't or can't enjoy adult books. Plenty of teens devoured Stephen King or Lord of the Rings. But after following characters who represented them in the likes of Narnia, they were expected to identify with adults, or teens who were facing very adult issues, rather than just being allowed to be teens. Again, Stephen King is actually pretty good about including plenty of teen protagonists in his work. And books like Christine, Fairy Tale, or Joyland could, at least thematically, be viewed as young adult novels, simply because King did take the time to explore his protagonist's psychology. I mean, you can't get any more teen angst than Carrie. That said, not every teen was ready to read horror, and such explorations of the teen psyche were the exception rather than the rule. When it came to mainstream fare, teens just weren't represented. They were expected to jump from reading about little kids struggling to fit in to reading about adults dealing with divorce or drug addiction, with nothing in between to represent their own struggles. This is where the YA genre came in, though it was still seen as a niche, and was therefore treated as less prestigious than adult novels, in much the same way the fantasy genre was scorned before Lord of the Rings popularized it. YA books were being written and even given movie adaptations, but their fandoms were treated as cult followings, and any films were still held in lesser esteem than those catered to a general audience, which usually prioritized what men enjoyed first. With Twilight exploding in popularity, the YA genre became a legitimate genre for publishers, and in the decades since, both the publishing and film industries have thrown their hearts into publishing such stories, having recognized the needs of teens to be seen and understood in the stories they read. Twilight isn't the best YA book out there, but it was a mainstream book where teen girls, could follow someone like them. And if I'm being honest, I found Bella super relatable as a teen, whatever the criticisms against her character. I had so much more in common with Bella than I ever could with some 40-year-old wizard dude. And while I still enjoy a good wizard dude story, there is something to be said for following a hero you can actually relate to. Twilight proved that teens were a demographic unto themselves, a market publishers could profit from, and a group worthy of having stories focused on them. The YA genre also got many adults reading again, though the controversies or debates around that are a topic for another video. Twilight isn't a perfect series. Even as someone who loves the saga, I can admit it has flaws. From the storytelling itself to the controversies regarding the subject matter, people will always be arguing for and against the series. And don't even get me started on the Team Edward versus Team Jacob debate, though I think I've made it clear on this channel which one I'd choose. All this said, Twilight, at least in my opinion, had a positive impact overall. Some have accused it of being anti-feminist, but it propelled a group of female creatives to fame and fortune. Some cringe when they see people reading Twilight, but many of those people wouldn't be reading at all if it weren't for the saga. Finally, some find YA books cringy, but Twilight's popularity revealed that the genre can excel, and that it's therefore worthy of consideration and respect. However you feel about Twilight, you can't deny the good it's done in spotlighting female creatives, in getting kids to read, in making female-led stories mainstream, or in making teens and women feel seen. In addition to the Twilight books themselves, you also have Bella. Now, I'm not saying Bella Swan was an amazingly developed and engaging heroine, but here's my hot take. There are aspects of her character which Meyer got right, and for many readers, myself included, she was a relatable protagonist. If you want my controversial opinion on why Bella's character actually works, click the video on the left. And if you want to hear my personal opinion on how each book in the saga stacks against the other, click the video on the right. Thanks for watching, and happy reading!